the West and Russia will be still non-violent hybrid warfare. And as the sophistication of hybrid measures and new technologies will make the challenges increasingly complex, Western democracies also have to develop new ways and tools to address and cope these challenges. One such innovative approach appears to be citizen cyber activism to counter foreign disinformation in the online sphere. But there are two obvious policy questions in the room that beg for answers. First, how effectively can cyber activism, like the transnational online movement of the cyber Elves, contribute to the resilience of Western societies? And second, how can policy create a supportive environment for cyber activism to nurture its growth and activities? I am very much looking forward to discussing these questions with our two distinguished speakers, whom I would like to introduce now a bit longer. Adéla Klečková serves as senior consultant for cyber risk advisory at Deloitte, where she focuses on hybrid and cyber warfare and related resilience and capacity building measures. She graduated from the War Studies Department at King's College London. She is also a member of the Digital Sherlocks Network founded by the Atlantic Council and was named to be one of the 35 under 35 young leaders in technopolitics by the Spanish governmental think tank CIDO. And Nad'a Kovalčiková, who serves as a senior analyst at EUISS, is a member of GlobSec Vulnerability Index Steering Committee, a member of GMF's European Interest Expert Group, a mentor with the Harvard Women in Defense Diplomacy and Development Network, and also a 2019 awardee of the Women in International Security. She has been a program manager and fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy in GMF, and previously she has also worked at NATO and in the European Parliament. Nad'a obtained her PhD from the University of Economics in Bratislava and her master's degree from LSE, Sciences Po, and also the University of Economics, Bratislava. Regarding the run of the show, Adéla will present her paper's main findings in approximately 15 minutes, followed by Nada''s comments roughly in the same amount of time, and approximately after 30 to 45 minutes, we will go into the Q&A. And I would like to encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, to submit your question either via the Q&A function of Zoom or simply put them in the chat box. And I also would like to remind you that the event is recorded and will be available online at the YouTube channel of the German Marshall Fund. And last but not least, I would like to mention that Adéla's work at the GMF is part of our ReThink.CEE fellowship program, which was established in order to support the next generation of policy analysts and civic activists from the Central and Eastern European region and the Western Balkan. And having said that, Adéla, please, you have the floor.
Thank you for the floor, Daniel. So I will start sharing my screen. Just give me a second. Okay. Please, can you confirm that you can see my screen and my presentation now?
Yes, thank you so much. We can see
Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Adéla Klečková, and today I would like to present you the results of my one-year research on the cyber elves. When I first heard about the elves, this is the idea and I had in mind. But eventually, I have learned that the elves are a specific type of cyber activist operating anonymously in semi-closed communities, primarily in the Central and Eastern European countries, monitoring and countering Russian-led information operations. Thus, this mental image changed to this very mysterious hacker. However, after 1 year of field research, I have learned that the elves are no mythical beings nor mysterious hackers, but that they are people just like you and me. In this 20-minute presentation, I would like to tell you first about the cyber activism in general and why it is important. Second, about the main opponents of the elves, the trolls. Third, about the elves and their combat against disinformation. And I will finish with outlining some policy recommendations. However, before getting into any of this, Just please allow me to tell you something about the research itself and the methodology. So this research is one of its kind. It is the first robust study on the cyber elves. Some facts that I'm going to share with you have never been shared with the public before. For example, the information on the Elves Academy and also on specific groups of the elves. The main source of this research are primary data gathered for over 1 year. The main method of the research were semi-structured interviews, observation, and direct participation, as I was honored enough to be invited to the Elves Academy, and also I was granted access to the cyber realms of the elves to try on my own skin how it feels to work as an elf for a week. Now, let's start with a general definition of cyber activism, which can be defined as the use of internet and internet-based socializing and communications and other information technologies to create, operate, and manage activism of any kind. Now, the role of both cyber and activism or non-state actors is expected to grow in the coming years in the information war. The cyber for multiple reasons. Some of them is that also partially due to the pandemic of COVID-19, our lives have shifted from offline into the online world. Also, the majority of Russian and Chinese and other information operations are happening primarily in the cyber world. Also, the cyber world is very convenient for the activism, among others, also because it is cheaper to disseminate messages like this. You can reach a broader audience at a quicker pace, and there are no gatekeepers who could be potential censors. And also due to the anonymity of internet, this is safer for the activists. Actually, this last feature is particularly important for the elves, for whom the anonymity is paramount for the nature of their work. Now, the activism is important because, as you already said, Daniel, we need to search for new and creative solutions to counter information operations. Also, there is a lack of political will, and the size of allocated funds is disproportionate to the severity of threat. Also, the Kremlin is relying more and more on external contractors, either paid trolls, which will be discussed later in this presentation, or cyber criminals. This approach actually has multiple benefits. One of them is that it is more cost efficient. Also, the Russian secret agencies do not need to compete over talent with each other and with the private sector. And also the non-state contractors are providing the benefit of plausible deniability. Now, to demonstrate or to provide you with an example of the increase of importance of cyber activism, I have chosen for you a piece of news which happened last week when the ransomware was historically for the very first time used not for the personal profit, but actually as a tool of political pressure against the current Belarusian regime, as you can see on the slide in the middle. Sorry. Now, let's move on to the main proponents or opponents of the elves, the trolls, who similarly to the cyber world, to the fantasy world, are creatures of chaos who prey on frustration and anger of the others by disrupting, attacking, or generally causing troubles on user-generated content platforms by posting unwanted online content. The story of Elves starts in 2014, when Finnish journalist Jessica Arrow discovered that the trolls can actually be paid and coordinated by the Kremlin to conduct information operations against the adversaries of Kremlin. The biggest troll layer, also called the troll factory, was discovered to be in St. Petersburg. Eventually, it was also revealed that the troll is paid about 400 euros per month for writing about 135 hate comments a day. Maybe just to provide you with a broader context, such a wage, especially for a comfortable office job, is considered to be rather generous in Russia. To give you an example of what coordinated evil force of troll can do, so one example is the story of the Jessica Arrow, who discovered these trolls, who eventually destroyed her life by constantly harassing her, calling her, posting her death threats or threats of rape, and even pretending to be her dead father trying to reconnect with her. The another example is meddling with democratic elections. We know examples from America, Germany, and France. The trolls were also partially responsible for the Operation Ghostwriter and also for the Operation Secondary Infection, which was discovered in 2019 by our colleagues from Atlantic Council. Both of these information operations were targeted primarily against NATO members with an intention to seed conflict among the members and to weaken the mutual relationships. It was especially targeted against the NATO troops based in the Baltics. There were these narratives were trying to depict the Baltic troops as not behaving as the troops should. The internet trolling has, however, developed with the emergence of new technologies. Currently, we are distinguished about 3 types of trolls. We know that there are just the normal trolls, the human-operated, non-automated social network accounts. Then there are the robots, or as an abbreviation, the bots. The bots or the robots are fully automated accounts that are acting upon a script. The potential problem with bots is that a user can theoretically create thousands of such bots, and since they are able to post tirelessly day and night, these bots can be then used to amplify messages or to create a complete information chaos. And then the last group are the cyborgs, who combine human and automated control. So how can the future of the trolling look like? Thanks to the modern technologies. So with the help of artificial intelligence, especially text prediction tools, multiple fake news and disinformation can be created at a huge scale and huge pace. The fake videos and voice clones can actually help to this disinformation to look even more realistic and more credible. As already mentioned, these robotic accounts can disperse these messages or these hostile content into the cyberspace. And thanks to the digital personalization, partially based on big data, these messages and this false content can actually be targeted at the people which is the most likely to resonate with them. It is also worth emphasizing that all of this technology is cheap, relatively cheap, is accessible, and it's relatively easy to use. So therefore, in the future, we can be expecting more of information operations, which will be more credible and better targeted. Luckily, we have the Elves to protect us from the dark armies of the trolls. The story of Elves started in Lithuania in 2014. At the beginning, there was a group of about 20 enthusiasts who were with growing cautious watching the increased aggressivity of Russia towards Ukraine, and also the increase of information operations in the Central and Eastern Europe, conducted by Russian trolls and Russian proxies. And because these enthusiasts have decided to fight and to counter against primarily Russian trolls, they have decided to call themselves Elves. They started as a very small movement or a very small group, but eventually in 2021, they spread into 13 European countries, and they created a stable structure of over thousands of Elves or of activists. The Elves play different roles in countering Russian trolls and Russian information operations. The most important, or the groups that I have identified in my research, are Elves in suits, cyber scouts and double agents, and PR Elves and mimetic warriors. Let's start with the Elves in suits. So, sorry, I just need to move the panel because I can't see the text. So the Elves in suits are actually using legal tools to fight against those who break the law in service to the Kremlin. The subject of these suits include hate speech, serious hoaxes, threats to national security, violence, or death threats. It is important to emphasize that the ruling of the court is of second importance to these elves, because they regard these suits as to be an important deterrent, especially when combined with media pressure. Perhaps the largest group I have encountered are the cyber scouts and double agents. So the main task of the cyber scouts are to gather data from open sources, such as social networks, media, or chain emails. They are looking for information on new trends in disinformation or about the activities of the known networks of trolls. The double agents are then present in the allegedly secret troll Facebook groups. They are monitoring these groups. They are gathering information, and sometimes they are even debunking or de-anonymizing the trolls. And the final group are the PR elves, who are using the data gathered by the cyber scouts and double agents to write reports on social media or posts, trying to promote activities of the elves. They try to counter pro-Kremlin toxic narrative with a positive one. Newly, they also use humor and memes, and it is no surprise that thanks to the popularity of the memes, these Facebook or Twitter posts count among the most successful ones. And these final reports are then circulated through various channels to politicians, media, and security services. This is an example from the Czech Elves. The Czech Elves post similar reports on their social media once a week, and these networks usually report on the most important narratives of that week regarding disinformation. As already mentioned, the Elves have developed very well-functioning and strong international cooperation among these 13 chapters which are operating across Central and Eastern Europe. The most important gathering of the Elves is the already mentioned Elves Academy. It happens once a year since 2018, and there are about hundreds of attendees each year. I was lucky enough to be invited to the Academy in 2021, and the curriculum of the Elves Academy can look as following. So the Elves were taught the memetic warfare, which is using humor, jokes, and memes to counter Kremlin disinformation. They are using open source intelligence, which are advanced method of search of information from the internet and from the open source. They're also using learning the troll or the bot hunting, which is basically the ability to distinguish the automated accounts we already talked about among the users of social networks. They are also learning practical skills such as key principles of cybersecurity, new trends in information operations, and they are sharing among each other best practices how to counter these information operations. I will conclude this presentation with several recommendations how each and every single one of us can support the activities of the Elves. Well, the main straightforward solution would be to simply join the Elves. But if you are hesitant to do that, I would suggest you supporting them on social media. You can either write your own post, or you can share, like, or comment the activities of the Elves that they are posting themselves. Also, you can invite the Elves on your public events. You can allow them to speak, to promote their activities and messages. Or if you are doing research on cyber or cyber activities, information warfare on Russia, you can use their data and experience to take your research on the next level. If you are considering more substantial help, such as financial aid, then I would advise you to ask these Elves directly, because there are some chapters in Europe that are rather open to accepting financial support, while others are strongly against that. So I would advise you to consult the Elves first through their official spokespeople or their social media. And perhaps the last and most important recommendation I can give you how to help the Elves is to assess online content critically and to be careful with our personal data. We must be respecting etiquette, and we must be avoiding hateful and aggressive behavior. And perhaps most importantly, we should share, we should think before we share anything online. Because the cyber world is what we make of it. We are the internet and we are the social networks. And our future is our responsibility. We all must be heroes, not victims in the information war. And with that, I will stop my presentation before I will lose my voice completely. I'm looking forward to your question, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Adéla, for this really great introduction. And now I feel a bit ashamed that I will still put some burden on your voice, because if you allow me, I would have a follow-up question. You made really great recommendation how citizens can support cyber activism and the Elves. And my question would be whether you have also some recommendations how governments could support cyber activism with policy measures. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this question. So again, I would say that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, because the Elves are operating in different environments. The Baltic Elves, where the perception of Russia being a threat is more clear than, let's say, in Hungary or in Poland. So again, I would say that if I'm a politician who wants to do something against this potential threat, then I would try to approach the Elven chapter directly. However, one general recommendation would be try to make the environment the Elves are operating in as friendly as possible. I was actually told by some Elves from especially the Central European countries who are members of academia or of secret services or army, or who are employees of the state, that they are actually worried that if somehow it became public that they are part of this movement, they would lose their job. And this idea is just crazy to me, that someone is in their free time for free, devoting the free time to protect us and our democracies and our way of living from Russia, and they should be live in fear that if this heroic deed is discovered, they should actually lose their jobs. That's just crazy. So I think this is the very start. Just let's not the Elves be worried to be Elves.
Thank you so much, Adéla. Nadia, you are really a long-time expert at the field of information and hybrid warfare. Where do Adéla's findings resonate the most with your previous experiences?
Thank you, Daniel, and good afternoon to everyone in Europe. Thank you, Adéla, for your presentation and for the paper. That it was really a pleasure to read. I'd like to just perhaps summarize all the things that I really found that they are resonating, and I'm sure not only with me, but everyone who has a chance to read it. So first, I think the topic is very original. And as you also mentioned, this is the first robust public study available on several aspects of the cyber activism, of the role of Elves in this cyberspace efforts, especially the Elves Academy, that I think could be also quite interesting to hear a bit more about, as you participated in that directly. And this was the 3rd edition. And I think by now we have a few hundreds of trained Elves from this academy. So this is something that also caught my attention, especially to see that this is happening. It's international cooperation. It's something that will continue to happen. And it's a successful event so far between the Elves. And I would like to hear from the Elves themselves. That, as I can see, we have many of them in the audience. So that's fantastic, and perhaps some of them could also share their experience of this international cooperation. Other aspect that I also liked about the paper, that it was very clear. I like how you structured it. First, introduce the cyber activism a bit more closely, as indeed it is understudied in a way, especially through this mobilization of the civilians that are unpaid, that are actually really dispersed in various countries. I also just love the presentation. I mean, the pictures you put there, you know, the suits, James Bond, I mean, who wouldn't like that, right? So very creative. And I think this also complements very well your paper, where you do speak about innovative ways to approach these kind of intrusions, attacks, activities online that are actually helpful. They're a threat to not only democracy and security, but also to actually individual people, such as the Elves many times seem to express their own personal security concerns, being part of this group, but still being there to fight it. Even though they were actually not feeling always very safe to do so. So I think this is even more admirable in a way, as you just mentioned, this this way to actually contribute in your free time for free shows really strong motivation. So all of these aspects, I think I can only applaud. And thank you so much for doing the research and sharing with us. What I would like to hear more about as well, considering that this is very topical, right? I think it is topical and it's going to be topical for many years ahead. The technological advancement will continue. Unfortunately, I think the cyberspace will also continue to be the battle space. And as you also mentioned in your research paper, the main battle space is actually the minds of the civilian population, and this is complemented by the cyber, the cognitive resilience, also the institutional, the real world physical threats, as we are seeing now with regards to what's happening in Ukraine, but also in Georgia, in Kazakhstan, also beyond Europe, right, in many other countries, unfortunately, and where this physical space and the internet cyberspace actually do collapse or they clash at some point, right? That this is translating into the physical threats and security impact. So I would be interested to hear from you where from your research you actually saw this kind of translation from these cyber threats, cyber battle shown in the physical world. You did touch upon, for example, the elections manipulation in a way in the US, in France, in Germany. So perhaps touching upon how this actually has very concrete, tangible effects on our democracies and our security. Second, perhaps if you could elaborate a little bit on the foreign versus domestic aspects, because you do speak about Elves being kind of the counterparts or the rivals of the Kremlin-based or Kremlin-led trolls. And you also mentioned that there are other actors that are rising in the information public spheres online, such as China and other actors, state actors, perhaps even non-state actors. Where do you see kind of the opportunities for the Elves to be able to counter hostile information operations regardless of the country in a way? How far do you think they have evolved with their tools, capacities, and lessons learned that the actor perhaps is less relevant than in the past when actually their efforts started to be countering the pro-Kremlin trolls? And perhaps just the last question for the first round and the comment at the same time. It's been really a pleasure to see how we have already received some engagements, even from the American Elves, right? Like it was exciting to kind of see, we probably have them also in the audience. So more of this idea of the international cooperation, transatlantic, but beyond as well. Where do you see your research potentially going? Do you see that this could be one avenue to explore how this international cooperation could be enhanced also beyond Europe potentially? We also had a question about beyond EU, NATO member states, like who is tracking this, who is monitoring the Elves efforts in the larger neighborhood, but also beyond Europe, right? These initiatives are so relevant and I think also so engaging from the societal resilience and capacities point of view. So I'll just stop it here because I think there is much more to discuss, but thank you so much for sharing your research, and I am very much looking forward to the further discussion today.
Well, thank you so much for your question, and thank you so much for the most positive feedback, I think, in the history of feedbacks. So that's that's very encouraging. Regarding to your questions, I will start with the third, and then I will move to the second, and then maybe to the first one. So the third question was concerning the future of the research. So actually, currently, I'm sort of waiting what sort of a response from the public am I going to receive on the research. That's why I'm so grateful also for having this event and for the GMF to organizing this event, which is giving me more public space to again present my findings and present the activities of the Elves. But actually, so far the response I have received, at least from the Czech and Slovak media, was amazing. They have actually taken interest in this topic. I have been approached by several major Czech and Slovak media who are asking me for interviews and for any kind of input on the Elves. So I'm actually really positive about the future. And right now, my main objective is to do everything I can with the very little influence I have to promote the activities of the Elves, to raise the awareness, to convince people to join the Elves, or to convince people who have the means and the power to perhaps do even more. What the more should be, I don't know, because again, as I said at the beginning, different chapters of different Elves have different needs. But I definitely do want to stick to this topic as long as I will be needed, and I want to do everything what's in my power to help the Elves to become even stronger and to help the Europe to become even more resilient towards information operations. Regarding to your second question, well, first the Russia versus the China and the other domestic impacts. So we have a saying in Czech Republic which can be translated as "too many hunters is the death to the deer." And just in the relation to the Elves, I think that the Elves can't be focusing on too many things at the same time. So they have decided to focus primarily on the Russia, which is logical due to the geographical proximity and also to the severity to the threat, especially to the Baltic countries and to the Ukraine and to the Belarus, who are neighbors to Russia. Having said that, actually, when I was talking to some people from NATO, they have asked me the question about China, because I would assume that China is the primarily concerned to the US right now. And actually, there have been some attempts to sort of, from the side of the Elves, to broaden the movement, to try to engage the countries in Asia to perhaps found their own chapters of Elves. And actually, I think that there is a huge potential for the Elves, not necessarily the Baltic or Central Eastern one, but the brand to be promoted to Asia and to try to counter information operations from China, which are especially against Taiwan and Japan and partially Korea, rather strong. So I can see the potential of growth, but I think that it is up to another countries perhaps to take up this focus. The same thing then I would say goes for the domestic versus foreign impact. So I think that the Elves, at least from what I have seen, are primarily trying to stay focused on Russia, but also they are generally against breach of human rights or against extremism of any kind. So I have noticed that, especially again, this is case for the Central Europe, that the Elves have been outspoken also against the far-right parties who are outspoken in the public space. So I hope that this has answered your second question. And I sort of got lost in the first one. So if you please could just repeat for me very quickly.
Of course, there is so much. So it was this physical versus cyber threats and how the fight in the cyberspace and these dynamics between the trolls and the Elves in the information cyberspace translates into real world. What you see as the upcoming risks or threats further, as you have mentioned also in your research, the impact on the elections in several countries that actually do not even have such a, or don't seem to have, especially in France or Germany, as they're not mentioned in the paper, these Elves communities to the same extent and as in Central and Eastern Europe, while being really impacted by the activities of the programming trolls there in the past 3-4 years throughout the elections periods as well, and also in the United States during the 2016 presidential elections. But we do know that there are American Elves. But how do you see this? how do you see this translation of this battle in the cyberspace, in the minds of the civilian population in the physical world, of the impact on democracy and on security?
So actually, I would start by saying that I think that maybe the online world is more real than it has ever been before. So I don't think that the distinction between offline and online being real and virtual really is applicable these days. I think that actually, as you have said it yourself, what is happening in these cyber realms can very well influence what is going on in the offline world. Talking about the results of the elections or the referendum, or also talking, for example, about the ransomware which was used against the Belarusian troops. So again, I think that there will be some impact. I also think that perhaps the France is not that resilient towards the Russian information operation as it could potentially be, also because there is no Elven chapter, at least to my knowledge. So therefore, I would perhaps like to appeal to our attendees who are in France to consider finding their own Elven chapter. But I think that the threat in the cyberspace is severe enough for us to be worried about it, even without having very measurable practical impact on the, as you said, real and offline world. So I think that this is my rather chaotic answer on your question, and I hope that it at least partially satisfies you.
Thank you so much. Nadia, would you like to react briefly, or?
Sure, I can briefly, and then I think we have been already receiving so many questions from the audience too. Perhaps you're right. I think we sometimes do have this tendency to still distinguish between cyber and so-called real, but the cyber and physical world, I think, are more and more interconnected. I think it would be great to do the research of these communities beyond the Central and Eastern Europe to really see if these chapters exist, or if not, how can this cooperation be extended, and how these chapters could be actually established, because perhaps sometimes it's just a question of where to start, as it started slow and small in Lithuania, already the 20 members, as you also rightly described in your paper. So I think this is there are a lot of ways to extend this research. I think some of them we touched upon now through these questions, where I do see potential to build on it, be it the actors, be it on the cooperation and the security elements of the impact these efforts and these dynamics have, actually not only on the Elves, but beyond that. And I'm happy to elaborate further and perhaps even respond to some of the questions that are in the audience. So just giving back the word to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much. And I think it's really time to open the Q&A, and thank you so much. We already received a couple of questions, but please feel free to submit further ones into the Q&A or in the chat box. And potentially, I just would like to bunch together some questions at the beginning, which relates to the operations of the Elves and how they work. Please feel free to answer them as it suits. So the first one that you mentioned, that Elves penetrate the troll networks on a regular basis, but how do they prevent infiltration by trolls in their own networks, and whether it's an issue at all that they also have to be protected from such infiltration measures. The second one, you mentioned the rather secretive character of the Elf movements. And the question rose several times, that how can people who really would like to support their activities contact them at the easiest and most convenient way, the different national chapters. And the third one, whether you know about any attempts when either the Elves or, on the other hand, IT companies tried to establish contacts and cooperation between cyber activist groups and, for example, software developers, and whether you are aware of some forms of already existing cooperation in that regard. And I think I would leave it there with these 3 questions at the beginning.
Thank you so much for these amazing questions. I will start with the second one. How can the people approach the elves? Which was actually a question I had my eyes on as well. So well picked. The answer would be, as I mentioned at the beginning, every Elven chapter has 1 or 2 spokespeople or representatives who are being publicly active, and the elves can be reached through these people. That could be the first option. The second option is that again, the elves have social networks or web pages. They have Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, and I believe that if you write them a polite message on Facebook asking them how you can be of help, then I think that your message will be very gladly replied. So I think that there are ways, because even though elves are trying to be anonymous, and you probably won't know that your neighbor is an elf, even if he is, then there are still ways how public can reach them, invite them to the debates, or ask them about their expertise. So that's the second question. The third question regarding to the connections between software firms and the elves. Well, actually, I was fortunate enough to be able to build such a connection. I helped to the company to become connected to one of the Elven chapters. Can't say how much it has progressed, and I can't say any more because the chapter and the company has asked me not to. But so this is one example I know of because I was part of it. It is also part of my plans for the future to continue being this bridge between the private sector and the cyber activists, because I think that the private sector, at least from the responses I have received so far, is so willing to help, but they just didn't know how, or they didn't have the bridge to connect them to the cyber activists. And I would be gladly this bridge to sort of help interconnect these 2 parts of societies. So I think that this is answer to the third question. And the first question, the infiltration of the troll groups. So I would start by saying that the troll groups are not that difficult to penetrate, especially those on Facebook. They are really not very cautious with their security. On the contrary, I would say, at least what I have seen, that the elves are very much. So at the beginning of the movement, the only way how one can become an elf was from a personal recommendation from another elf. This policy has been eventually dropped because the movement wanted to grow a bit further. But before being accepted an elf and being granted the access to the cyber realm of the elves, so there is a very thorough vetting process. The elves are using their open source intelligence magic to really verify whether this person is or is not trustworthy. And of course, nothing is 100% secure and sure. So I can imagine that the Elven movement could be penetrated, but at the same time, I was amazed by the security or safety breaks that this movement has put in place. So even if someone gets in, his access is very limited, so he can cause very little damage.
Thank you so much. And I think you partially also answered some questions which arrived in the meantime with regard to the internal procedures and self-regulating rules of the elves. But some questions are still hammering a bit on the policy dimensions. So you already mentioned that there is no one-size-fits-all approach how the different national elves chapters could be supported. But there is still the question in general that how governments could try to create a supportive environment for groups which are informal, decentralized, and rather secretive. that would be one question, and I think it's to both of you, obviously. And potentially I would also ask a further question on my end, that where do you see the role of cyber activism as part of a broader social response toolkit to foreign interference in relation with state-led policy measures? So where would you define the place, the desired scope, and the position of cyber activism vis-a-vis state responses or state-led responses to Russian interference or information warfare?
I will give Nad'a the space because I feel like I'm talking all the time.
Leaving the easy ones, right? Thank you so much, Daniel, for this. I think, yes, this is one part of the paper, I think, that could really also go a little bit more into depth, if maybe the next paper can address it, if Adéla will be interested to do the research on it or others. So I do think that there is potential to engage with the institutions more. As you said, the spokespersons of many of these chapters are actually public. They are already present in the public spheres more openly. So this factor of anonymous approach is mostly, it seems, applied to the members that are just doing the operations on a daily basis. So there is a way of having very clear and perhaps even institutionalized interaction with these chapters. And I do think there are ways to do it. There has been already increased effort from different member states of the EU or NATO, but also the EU institutions and NATO to engage with the third sector, with the think tanks, NGOs, the research institute, or even private companies. So there are these mechanisms more and more put in place, and I do think that these chapters of Elves could be actually included in such efforts. So existing mechanisms, but at the same time, I think the question, for example, of the funding is interesting to ponder upon, because on one hand, it seems the motivation is to do this in the free time for free as part of this activism, and they're driven, it seems, many Elves, as you described in your research, by this more volunteer aspect of it and not as a business, which is actually contrary to the trolls, right, who are mostly paid and they are even hired from private companies, etc. So I think there needs to be a debate, perhaps with different chapters, as different chapters of Elves in different countries are facing different challenges and also have different capacities. So perhaps this more tailored approach to the chapters by the institutions, at the same time as also having a little bit more common platform to discuss and engage with all of them to enhance this international cooperation and lessons learned and exchange factor at the same time. Then the second question, Daniel, perhaps on the role of the cyber activism as part of the wider toolkit that can be used by the state-led institutions, actors to especially counter the Russian foreign interference. I think this is important to put in the context as well. Right now, I think what is actually very critical to always also see if there is a timely way to enhance certain efforts in certain contexts, as for example, I think we're witnessing at the moment. So I think that would make sense to actually perhaps pay more attention, especially during this kind of critical, tensed moments, but not only, because we have also seen that, for example, the spread of manipulated information, propaganda is not only happening two weeks or 1 month prior to the elections, for example. It's a whole election cycle that we have to pay the attention to. So while trying to make sure that we do focus on these activities and perhaps even enhance their effect and impact during the very critical moments, I think there needs to be more sustainable way to approach this, because these operations hostile influence operations, they are ongoing and they will continue to grow. I fully agree with that. And not only because of technological advancement, but because also of the number of actors that are rising, the stakes are getting higher, the tensions are also rising between not only state actors, but also different levels, different actors on various topics. So I do think there the role of cyber activism is important, but I also believe that there needs to be more institutionalized approach to these efforts to counter foreign interference or information manipulation or wherever it's coming from in a more sustainable and meaningful way, effective way, to be cost effective, but also to be sustainable, to be impactful. And cyber activism for the moment seems to be quite fragmented, underfunded, understudied, underrepresented. So until we perhaps get it more engaged, definitely other tools at the institutional level need to be developed and implemented, and as they are, but will need to be more.
I agree with everything as Nad'a said, and actually in my mind those both questions are interconnected, and the answer to those is very simple: just please do your job properly. And I'm not joking. I don't think that the cyber activists need any particular help or anyone, you know, guiding them through. I think that they have done amazing job so far. I mean, really kudos to all of the Elves and kudos to all of the other cyber activists. I think that there is not that much that can be done by the state directly to support the cyber activism beside what I have already said in the presentation and also in the answer to your first question, Daniel. But I think that the best way how to enhance the activities of the Elves as a politicians is to take the information warfare seriously, to devote more resources to that, to show bigger determination to counter these threats, to show public support to these activists, to build proper state organization and structures which can actually counter these informations. And actually, I think because we are in the fantasy world, and I might conclude with a thought from another of my favorite fantasy books, which is The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski, where one character said, well, the ideal world for the Witchers is the world without the creatures, where the Witchers are not needed anymore. And I think that I'm speaking for the Elves as I said that the ideal world for the Elves is the world where the Elves are not needed anymore, because the state is doing such a tremendous job that the people do not feel the need to defend their own countries in their own free time.
Thank you so much. I still would like to encourage all of our participants to submit questions if they have any to our speakers, and potentially we could continue with two further ones. One is that it relates a bit to the social background of Elves in the different countries. So I would have expected that the presence of Elf communities strongly correlates with a rather critical approach in the society to Russia, or really a strong threat perception by Russia. But if we take a look on the map what Adéla shared with us, we see that there are rather active Elf cells in countries which in the European Union are rather known for rather Russia-friendly social attitudes, while they are still lacking from countries where the threat posed by Russia is widely shared in the broader social attitudes. In the first category may belong perhaps Germany, or even in some form Slovakia. And in the second one, with the strong threat perceptions towards Russia, Romania. And I just wonder whether you could provide us any food for thought. What social factors can determine the presence of Elf communities in the different societies? And what can be the explanation that in some cases where we could expect that there can be a strong Elf community, like for example in Romania, we don't know about their existence. Yes, and the second question, sorry, and the second question was put in the chat box, that how can the Elves maintain their credibility in the cyber sphere and in the public debates? and how can they avoid a situation that practically, due to this ongoing conflict between trolls and elves, at the end of the day, the general credibility in the information provided in the online sphere will simply decrease, and ultimately this information security will suffer and the credibility of the information will suffer.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. And I'm no expert in politics, and I don't pretend to be, but I don't think that we need to necessarily try to politicize everything. I think that the division is rather clear. It's the East, the formal Soviet bloc versus the West, and I think that of course there are some exceptions, but this is the general impression that I'm getting. And again, I think it's given partially by the proximity of the Russia, partially the historical experience of the Russia, because I think that we from the Eastern and Central Europe, we know that living under Russian oppression is nothing that we would wish anyone to experience. So of course we are regarding Russia with bigger caution than countries which do not have this experience, as is the western part of the Europe. So from my very little comprehension of politics, this is my understanding of the situation, and I really wouldn't make it more complicated than it already is. So I hope that this satisfies your question. And regarding to the question of trust and credibility, well, I would say that trust and credibility is made by the public opinion, right? So as long as you will trust the elves, as long as you will believe that what they are saying is true, that their work is just, then that long the credibility of the elves will last. And I think this is the most important thing. Just believe that what the elves are doing this is right, but no one is forcing you at the same time. So if you think that they are better and more credible source of information, then please follow those. Just make sure that they are not paid by Russia, and that's all.
Thank you. Nadia, would you like to contribute? Or?
Perhaps yes, and the second one, I think the question of the language there could also help, as many of these chapters are publishing in the local media outlets their results, their efforts, and in the local or in their own national languages. A lot of this work is actually not as perhaps visible to the Anglo-Saxon communities and more to the Western world, as these chapters are actually in the countries of the Central and Eastern Europe, with languages that are not very much spoken beyond those areas, those countries. So I think one of the ways to keep the credibility or even expand the reach of these efforts of the elves, I think could be actually making sure that they do get visibility in other perhaps languages such as English or French or German, where we do not see visibility of these efforts and even awareness about the existence perhaps of these communities. So maybe just one thought to think about how to use our public spheres that are so rich, especially in Europe, where we do have the information, we do have all this work done, but we do not necessarily use the tools we do have to communicate it to the wider public beyond the countries where these chapters are located. So I think this could be one way to enhance the credibility even beyond the national borders.
Thank you so much. Of course, as a political scientist, it's really a big challenge to avoid the politicization of everything. And in the chat flow, questions are re-emerging regarding potential information about other ELF chapters. And I understand that it's difficult to answer this question, especially because your research very much focused on the activities of the Czech and Slovak chapters, first of all, but also in the Central European focus, but other regions definitely laid outside of the scope of your research. But I think many aspects of the questions interrelates, because of course we touched upon the potential countering of Chinese influence and influence operations, or your partial answer to these questions was that it might be the main profile of other national chapters outside of Central and Eastern Europe. But we see the emergence of Chinese information operations in Central and Eastern Europe. And especially there is a European region, which, sorry for that, but is very often a playground of such influence efforts and attempts of various great powers, may that be Russia, may that be China, may that be other regional players like Turkey. And that's definitely the Western Balkan. Of course, there is again the difference that the social attitudes to all these great powers are not necessarily critical. And these attempts are always not seen as threats to the national sovereignty or the public good. But the question is often reemerging whether you have any information about elf cells or similar cyber activism in the Western Balkan or other regions. Mm-hmm. Do you have, or?
Let's see. Again, I will start with the Chinese question, because I can see in the chat that there is a great support for the the Chinese question. So my understanding of the activities of the elves is that they are trying to fight against those threats which are threatening the safety of their countries. That's their primary and biggest objective. So currently, the biggest potential threat is Russia, but I can see that the China is getting more and more space in the public discussion among security communities, among academics, and so on. I can also see in the work of these elves that they are not solely focused on Russia anymore, that there are some when there is a disinformation regarding China, or some information operation discovered by the investigative journalists, so the elves pay attention to that as well. So definitely, I'm not saying that the elves are rigidly focused on China. I'm saying that the trend is slightly changing, but the trend will always mirror what is regarded by the elves as the biggest security threat. That's how it is. At the same time, I was very pleasantly surprised when I learned that at the Elves Academy, there are actually active talks between the European chapters and the potential communities in Asia who are interested in learning how to counter information operations and who are potentially interested in finding their own chapters within Asian countries. So this is definitely very positive and very exciting. And actually, if there is any interest from anyone, then I'd be more than happy to devote my future research to the potential of China countering elves. So definitely this is something I'm happy to focus upon if the interest arises. Regarding to your second question, so the main focus of my research was on Central Europe and on Baltics, because at the beginning, it seems like such a long time ago, in 2019, when I first applied for this fellowship, these 5 chapters were the most developed and established ones. So that's why I have decided to focus primarily on them. Eventually, as I went further with my research, I've learned that the movement is actually rather broad, but the 11 chapters are at different stages of development. Some are rather small, rather new, rather fragile, and therefore they do not want to come out public yet because they are afraid what the potential backlash might do to these fragile structures. So therefore, I would feel like I'm breaking the trust of the elves by talking about this in any more detail than I already had. So therefore, I'm very sorry, but this is all I'm going to say on this topic.
I think many feedbacks and messages in the chat line are just reiterating what you said, that every individual elf community is really focusing on the most important perceived threat, and that also explain why, for example, US elves repeatedly emphasized, for example, their participation in the internal kind of information warfare or misinformation campaigns and their countering. So within the domestic context of US politics was what is apparently until now largely missing from Europe, because simply the threats are different. So in case if we don't have or don't see further questions, so as a kind of closing round, I just would like to ask you, what would be your most important recommendations and suggestions, just once again in 2 minutes, for the professional community who are focusing on hybrid warfare and information warfare, for the cyber activists, and potentially also for politicians? How could these assets of cyber activism be better and more efficiently used in the upcoming years? I don't know, Nadia, would you like to start this time?
Sure, of course, I'm glad to try to answer this. I think partially we have touched upon it already with the funding and institutionalization of this relationship between government institutions, international organizations, and civilian activists. Perhaps on that, I also saw in the comments, and I agree, and following on the comment on language that I just shared some recommendations there. I also agree with the different approach, perhaps across generations, as not only in way of how to speak to different generations, because that has to be tailored, our strategic communication, the way, the context of the things, the historical understanding may resonate differently with older generations than maybe the humor with younger generations, but also older. But I think all of this more tailored approach also to make sure that we do address different groups of the society, also beyond the generations and language. It should be also different communities, men, women, marginalized communities, different groups, even children, right? As this starts very early on now, it's the children that are exposed to this digital world much sooner than the generations before, and therefore the interactions are different. So I think all of this should be taken into account more when developing perhaps more traditional types of policies in a more innovative way. And then the other side of that, engagement of younger generations in the cyber activism as well can contribute to that, but not only younger generation, but again, all of those segments of society, I think, making sure that the different citizens are represented as well, trying to also use this wide spectrum of the societal contributions that we need to have, I think, across different fields, including in cyber activism, as there are different targets. Cyber activism is not only about the Russian trolls speaking about national interests of the EU and NATO member states, it's also about the hate speech. It's also about death threats. It's also about many other things. And this really touches upon different parts of our society, different people, communities. And so I think this kind of community approach, understanding in the context, in the national context and regional, could be one way. And perhaps just an idea of having all of these national chapters, I think, moving beyond me coming as the, working on transnational security, moving beyond this national approach, perhaps even thinking of a European chapter where we would have multilingual Elves cooperating, also sharing all of these lessons learned in a little bit more centralized way, potentially. But having this European group could be an interesting way to approach it, and also kind of delete these borders between EU member states and non-EU member states, and one member state, another member state, but also be able to ensure this diversity of the members of this group in a way that perhaps may be more difficult just within the national concepts. There we will come probably back to the question of how to do that, the resources for that, the location of that. Right now, I think perhaps in the cyberspace we may face less challenges on that front, but it does involve the questions to consider and to discuss. And here we would also broaden a little bit the approach to the challenges, be not only from Russia, but as the questions were about China or the other actors. there, because having such a community perhaps gathered in a more centralized way could ensure that the various dimensions are covered a bit more. There is more capacity to do so. So I'll maybe just leave it here, but I do think there is a lot of potential in cooperation and in thinking beyond the national borders approach and beyond the current challenges, and thinking for the future as well with a little bit more foresight approach.
Thank you so much, Nadja. I think that was a critical impulse to the creation of an Elf Federation in the future. And I would like to give the opportunity for Adéla to say the closing words.
Thank you. Again, I have to agree with everything Nadja has said. So thank you for leaving me very little to say. But no, seriously, I would like to conclude with 4 points. First point is the massive thank you to the two of you and to the audience for such an amazing discussion in having interest in the Elves. It's beyond what I have expected in my wildest dreams. So thank you so much. The second point is that I still feel like there is more to be said, and I have still quite a lot of ideas what can be done. So therefore, I would just like to appeal to all the distinguished experts in the audience. Please, if you are interested in my research, if you are interested in the Elves, please contact me. Let's continue this discussion. I'm more than happy to connect you to the Elves in your distinguished countries. If that's what you like. I would really like to become the bridge who can somehow connect the Elves with the academic world and with the academic community, which actually leads to the third point I would like to share, and which reacts to what Daniel asked us to talk about in our final remarks. And again, I think that the most important thing that the academia and the NGOs can do for the Elves is just to initiate a dialogue, just acknowledge the Elves, acknowledge their activities, acknowledge that they exist, ask their public spokespeople to come to your podcasts, to your events, to write articles or opinion editorials for you, or even just build upon their information and just give them some credential in your studies, because I mean the finding and the expertise the Elves have on Russia and the information operations is just amazing. So I think that is the best, and I think it's also beneficial for you. So that's something I would recommend you to do very much so. And my final point, and again, I touched upon this already in my presentation, if you want to enhance the Elves, if you want to make their life and work easier, then just if every single of us just thought critically and thought before we share something online, and just respected the etiquette, and ideally even encourage our closest relatives to do so, then I think the world would be the online and also offline world would be a nicer place to be, and I think that the Elves would definitely have less work to do. So I think that this is everything I wanted to say from my side. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you for your attention. I'm really looking forward to hearing from as many as possible of you with your follow-up questions and suggestions.
Adéla, Nadja, thank you so much for your insightful inputs and the great conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, also many thanks for you being with us today, and have a nice day. I hope that you found the conversation also interesting and can benefit from that in your future work, especially if you are part of these cyber activist networks, and hopefully see you next time in one of our webinars. Have a great day and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good day.